Think the 90s were just hits like Titanic and Jurassic Park? Think again. This decade also gave us movies so disastrous they nearly bankrupted studios. One pirate film lost over $100 million, a now beloved prison drama barely made half its budget back, and one cult classic. The audience actually walked out. These are the biggest and weirdest flops of the 90s. A pirate adventure that was supposed to revive a dead genre ended up sinking Hollywood's most expensive ship instead. We're talking about Cutthroat Island. With a production budget soaring past $100 million, giant sets, real ship explosions, and Gina Davis wielding a sword as a pirate queen, the film was designed to be a blockbuster spectacle. But instead of treasure, it found disaster. At the global box office, Cutthroat Island hauled in just $18 million, losing more than $100 million and single-handedly bankrupting its studio, Coralco Pictures. Behind the curtain, the chaos was even worse. Michael Douglas was originally cast but dropped out, forcing a last-minute replacement with Matthew Modine. The script went through 6 rewrites, and director Rennie Harlin, best known for directing Die Hard 2, fought constantly with the studio while the budget spiraled out of control. Production was described as a nightmare long before the movie even hit theaters. And when it finally did, critics tore it apart. Roger Ebert's faint praise of it being satisfactory was actually one of the kinder reviews. Most called it bloated, joyless, and a spectacle without heart. The film was even nominated for a Razzie Award for Worst Director, cementing its reputation as a notorious flop. The cruel twist of fate? Less than 10 years later, Disney launched Pirates of the Caribbean using nearly the same ingredients. Swashbuckling pirates, cursed treasure, outrageous stunts, and struck box office gold. Timing, as always, is everything. Today, Cutthroat Island lives on as one of the greatest Hollywood shipwrecks, a movie so overblown and disastrous that it accidentally became legendary. In 1995, Las Vegas glowed with neon promise, and MGM thought they had the perfect story to match its glittering excess. A young woman chasing stardom, a tale of ambition, betrayal, and desire, Showgirls was meant to be daring cinema for adults only. The studio poured $45 million into the production. Paul Verhoeven, fresh off Basic Instinct, sat in the director's chair, and Elizabeth Berkley, once the wholesome teenager from Saved by the Bell, stepped into the spotlight, betting everything on this role that could transform her career. But almost from the beginning, the gamble turned sour. The film was branded with an NC-17 rating, a kiss of death in Hollywood. Theaters refused to screen it. Television stations refused to advertise it. For a movie designed to shock, it suddenly had nowhere to be seen. When Showgirls did land in theaters, it only earned $20 million domestically and about $37 million worldwide. The reactions were swift and merciless. Audiences laughed at scenes meant to be serious. Critics tore it apart. Roger Ebert called it the worst movie ever made with a budget this size, and it basically seems to deliver the screenwriter's masturbatory fantasies. The New York Times dismissed it as little more than expensive trash, and in the aftermath, Berkley's career was left in ruins. Dropped by her agency, mocked by late-night hosts, she became the face of Hollywood failure. And yet, the story didn't end there. On home video, Showgirls found new life. Rentals soared past $100 million, turning the film into one of MGM's most profitable titles on VHS. What had been condemned in theaters was reborn as camp, outrageous, excessive, and unforgettable. What was once a career-ending flop has transformed into a cult icon, studied in film schools and celebrated for its unintentional brilliance. In the summer of 1995, Universal Pictures unveiled what was being called the most expensive movie ever made, an ambitious vision of Earth drowned beneath endless oceans, where survivors searched for the mythical dry land. Kevin Costner, fresh from his Oscar glory with Dances with Wolves, was the star and co-producer. The world was ready for Waterworld. But behind the waves of hype, a storm was brewing. The budget ballooned from $65 million to over $175 million, thanks to elaborate sets built directly on the ocean. One of them literally sank during production. Hurricanes battered the cast and crew. Kevin Costner clashed bitterly with director Kevin Reynolds. Their friendship collapsed before filming even ended. When Waterworld finally reached theaters, the press had already dubbed it Kevin's Gate, a disaster waiting to happen. Critics were split. Some admired its scale, its world building, its sheer audacity. Others mocked it as bloated and joyless. Audiences, primed by months of bad press, stayed away in droves. And for Kevin Costner, once Hollywood's golden boy, it marked the beginning of a career decline. Domestically, the film earned just $88 million, far short of what it needed to break even. Globally, it eventually climbed past $264 million, but with marketing and distribution costs, it was still considered a crushing disappointment at the time. And yet, the tide slowly turned. On home video and TV syndication, Waterworld found a second life. Theme parks built stunt shows based on it, and in time, the film's reputation shifted from box office disaster to ambitious misfire, a flawed epic that tried to do something no one else dared attempt. So in the end, Waterworld didn't drown completely, but it remains one of the 90s most famous examples of how ambition, ego, and bad luck can sink even the mightiest productions. 2 years after Waterworld, Kevin Costner tried again, another epic, sprawling vision of a broken future. This time the world wasn't drowned, it was dry, ruined, and desperate. Costner would direct, produce, and star in a 3-hour saga about hope, letters, and rebuilding civilization in a movie called The Postman. Warner Brothers invested around $80 million into the project. Costner, still chasing the glory of Dances with Wolves, believed he could craft a heartfelt epic where a simple postal worker becomes a symbol of unity in a shattered America. But audiences weren't exactly buying it. When The Postman was released on Christmas of 1997, it opened against Titanic. James Cameron's love story at sea was packing theaters worldwide, while Costner's mailman dystopia barely filled seats. The result? Just $17 million at the US box office. Globally, it didn't even crack $25 million, a humiliating loss for such a high-profile film. Critics didn't hold back either. The Los Angeles Times called it a bloated, pretentious epic. Variety said it was built on a foundation of cliches. It swept the 1998 Razzie Awards, winning Worst Picture, Worst Director, and Worst Actor for Costner himself. Behind the scenes, stories circulated of Costner's control freak tendencies, that he insisted on long takes, sentimental speeches, and a running time no studio could save. Crew members whispered that no one dared challenge him after Waterworld. Still, history remembers The Postman less as an epic and more as a punchline. It's the film that proved even Oscar winners can stumble, and sometimes a message just never gets delivered. In 1993, Hollywood thought it had the perfect summer blockbuster. The formula was unbeatable: massive explosions, a clever twist on action movies, and the most bankable star alive, Arnold Schwarzenegger. On paper, Last Action Hero looked like a guaranteed hit. The story follows a young boy who magically steps into the world of his favorite action hero, played by Arnold himself. It was meant to be funny, self-aware, and thrilling all at once, a parody of Hollywood cliches that still delivered the spectacle audiences craved. Columbia Pictures poured over $85 million into production, and tens of millions more into marketing. But trouble struck before the movie even hit theaters. The script had been rewritten endlessly, with up to a dozen different writers taking a shot at it. Director John McTiernan, the man behind Die Hard, later admitted the film didn't know what it wanted to be. Test screenings were a disaster, and yet Columbia pressed forward, determined to release the movie in June, just 1 week after Jurassic Park. That timing was fatal. Spielberg's dinosaurs dominated the summer box office, and Last Action Hero never stood a chance. Its opening weekend brought in just $15 million, far below expectations. By the end of its run, it grossed $50 million in the US and $137 million worldwide, numbers that fell far short once marketing costs were factored in. Critics were brutal. The Washington Post dismissed it as a movie trying to be both parody and action, failing at both. Audiences expecting another Terminator 2 instead found themselves watching a confused mix of satire and spectacle. But here's the twist. In later years, Last Action Hero developed a cult following. Viewers began to appreciate its ambition, its quirky humor, and its early commentary on Hollywood excess. Still, history remembers it as one of the great misfires of the 90s. Proof that even Arnold Schwarzenegger couldn't outmuscle bad timing, messy scripts, and a rampaging T-Rex. By the early 90s, Bruce Willis was at the peak of his powers. Die Hard had made him a global superstar, and every studio wanted to ride his momentum. Out of this came Hudson Hawk, an action comedy he co-wrote, co-produced, and starred in. On paper, it was supposed to be a quirky mix of Indiana Jones Adventure and Looney Tunes slapstick. In reality, it became one of Hollywood's most infamous disasters. The budget ballooned to around $65 million, a huge gamble for 1991. Willis played Eddie Hudson Hawk Hawkins, a cat burglar forced into stealing Renaissance art for a group of eccentric villains. The plot was packed with musical duets, cartoonish violence, and surreal humor that baffled nearly everyone. And behind the scenes, Willis had enormous creative control. Reports from crew members suggested he constantly rewrote scenes to showcase his own comedic style. Director Michael Lehman, fresh off cult hit Heathers, struggled to rein in the chaos, what resulted in a film that didn't know if it was parody, action, or absurdist comedy. When Hudson Hawk hit theaters in May 1991, critics pounced. The New York Times called it smug and boneheaded. Audiences were even harsher. The film earned just $17 million domestically and about $30 million worldwide, nowhere near breaking even. It went down in history as one of the most expensive box office bombs of the decade. Now, for Bruce Willis, the failure stung. His reputation as a leading man took a hit, and it took years and another Die Hard sequel to restore his box office dominance. Today, Hudson Hawk has gained a small cult following among fans of bizarre cinema, but in the 90s, it was less a quirky gem and more a painful reminder that not every star can write their own ticket. In the late 90s, studios were chasing the next Jurassic Park. Michael Crichton novels had already delivered billion-dollar hits, and Warner Brothers believed they had another winner in Sphere. The ingredients looked perfect: a best-selling book, a $73 million budget, and 3 powerhouse stars: Dustin Hoffman, Sharon Stone, and Samuel L. Jackson. On paper, it sounded unstoppable. A team of scientists discovers a massive alien spacecraft at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Inside lies a mysterious golden sphere that can bend reality itself. With Barry Levinson, the Oscar-winning director of Rain Man, at the helm, expectations soared. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. The tone of the movie shifted wildly. Part psychological thriller, part monster movie, part sci-fi spectacle. Hoffman and Stone reportedly clashed with the director, frustrated by the chaos on set. What was meant to be a sleek, suspenseful story turned into a confusing mix of half-baked ideas. When Sphere surfaced in theaters in February 1998, audiences didn't bite. It opened soft and sank fast, grossing just $37 million domestically, barely half its budget. Critics ripped it apart. Roger Ebert said the story collapsed under its own weight, while Variety described it as lifeless and talky. Even fans of the novel felt betrayed, complaining that the movie stripped away everything that made the book gripping. Looking back, Sphere had everything it needed to succeed: a strong concept, a stacked cast, a proven source. But instead of becoming another 90s sci-fi classic, it became a cautionary tale, proof that even the best ingredients can spoil if the recipe is wrong. Touchstone Pictures believed they had an epic on their hands. Based on Michael Crichton's novel, Eaters of the Dead, the 13th Warrior promised brutal Viking battles, sweeping landscapes, and the kind of prestige that could rival movies like Braveheart. With Antonio Banderas as the lead, the studio poured more than $100 million into the project. But from the very start, the production was cursed. Director John McTiernan delivered a cut that left test audiences cold. The studio panicked. Crichton himself stepped in to direct reshoots, essentially firing McTiernan without saying it outright. Millions more were spent on new footage, rewriting entire sections of the story. The chaos ballooned the budget to an eye-watering $160 million, making it one of the most expensive films of the decade. And when the movie finally limped into theaters in August 1999, the result was devastating. It grossed just $32 million worldwide. Industry analysts estimated losses of up to $130 million, cementing it as one of the costliest flops of all time. Critics didn't spare it either. The New York Times called it a muddled, joyless mess. Roger Ebert was kinder, praising some of the visuals, but admitted it never comes together. Audiences, meanwhile, had little interest in a dark, violent Viking story during a summer dominated by brighter fare like The Sixth Sense. Behind the scenes, the disaster damaged careers. McTiernan's once golden reputation never recovered, and even Crichton's credibility as a hitmaker took a blow. It was a film that drowned under its own ambition and dragged its studio down with it. Some movies just flop at the box office. Others become legends of disaster. The Island of Dr. Moreau is the latter. A film so chaotic behind the scenes, it's still studied as one of Hollywood's strangest implosions. Based on H.G. Wells' classic novel, the movie had everything going for it. A budget of $40 million, a surreal sci-fi story, and two acting titans, Marlon Brando and Val Kilmer. But almost from the start, everything went south and things got, let's just say it got really weird. The original director, Richard Stanley, had spent years developing the project. Days into filming, he was fired after clashing with the studio. Legend has it he snuck back onto set in disguise, watching from the shadows as his dream unraveled. In his place, veteran director John Frankenheimer was brought in, but instead of stability, chaos only grew. Marlon Brando, by then infamous for his eccentric behavior, refused to learn his lines. He demanded to wear an ice bucket on his head during scenes, played piano with his feet, and insisted on bizarre costume changes. Val Kilmer, fresh off Batman Forever, showed up late, fought with the crew, and reportedly made the set unbearable. The result? A movie that critics called grotesque, incomprehensible, and a nightmare of wasted talent. At the box office, it barely clawed together $49 million worldwide, hardly enough to cover its cost. Behind the disaster, though, lies one of Hollywood's strangest what-if stories. Richard Stanley's original vision was darker, more faithful to Wells's novel, and some insiders believe it could have been a cult masterpiece. Instead, we got Frankenstein's monster of reshoots, improvisations, and egos run wild. Today, it's hailed as one of the greatest films ever made. IMDb users rank it at the very top of their all-time list, ahead of The Godfather. It's studied, quoted, and beloved around the world. But when The Shawshank Redemption was released in 1994, believe it or not, it was a total flop. Frank Darabont's prison drama, based on a Stephen King novella, had a modest budget of $25 million and starred Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. Critics praised its quiet power, its humanity, and its hope, but audiences? They barely showed up. The title confused people. What was Shawshank? Was it a legal thriller? A documentary? Warner Brothers struggled to market a slow 2.5-hour film about friendship behind bars. And with heavy competition that year, especially from Pulp Fiction and Forrest Gump, Shawshank earned only $16 million in its initial run, not even recouping its budget. Behind the scenes, Darabont admitted he was crushed. This was his dream project, and the lack of audience response felt like failure. Even Freeman recalled in interviews that the film came and went without a sound. But then something remarkable happened. The movie was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. It didn't win any. Forrest Gump swept that year, but the attention brought it back into theaters. Then, on home video and cable television, the real miracle began. Millions discovered the story of Andy Dufresne and Ellis Redding. Word of mouth spread, rentals soared, and by the late 90s, The Shawshank Redemption was no longer a forgotten flop, it was a cultural phenomenon. Today, it stands as the ultimate example of a film that failed on release but triumphed over time. Proof that sometimes box office numbers mean nothing compared to the power of storytelling. The Shawshank Redemption may have flopped in 1994, but it has since escaped the prison of obscurity and walked tall into film history. Which of these 90s flops shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more movie deep dives.